We're now on Daf Zayin Amud Beis. Ve'ilu magvias hashulchan lo ktani. When the Mishnah is calculating clearly how many kohanim are necessary for the lechem aponim, it doesn't mention anything about lifting up the shulchan. The shulchan on which the lechem aponim and the v'zichin are placed is on the ground. Well, we should bring in a kohen. Maybe you need two kohen for this. I don't know, to lift up the shulchan. So obviously, if we're going to assume an analogy between kmitza and menachos and Seder and Siluk of Lechem Aponim, then we should need Kohanim to lift up the Shulchan. But the answer is, and this is what Rav Sheshes wanted to prove, that this, for the Kiddush in a Kli does not require the Kohen to lift up the Kli, and even on the ground, it's enough. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, Lav Amrit Hasam Seder Avodas Nakat, you yourself gave an answer that the Mishnah is only telling you the Seder, the sequence of the Avodah. We're not counting Kohanim. Hochanami Seder Avodas Nokid. Midomi Hasam Lo Nochas Minyanas the Kohanim. Right, we weren't counting how many Kohanim are necessary for the Avodah. But Hacha, right? Right, so when we were calculating the Seder Avoda of the Mincha, we weren't calculating how many Kohanim, but here, in this Mishnah regarding Lechem Aponim, the Mishnah goes out of its way to count Kohanim. And the Mishnah seems to assume that 4 and 4 are sufficient, right? 2 pairs of 2 Kohanim. Why didn't the Mishnah mention the Magbia? So, I have a real question here. Why did he mention the Magbia? Im Isa, right? If you're going to say that the Kohanim have to lift up the Shulchan for the Kiddush of and the Avoda of Lechem Aponim, is listening Magbia. El Shmamino Komtzim Mibli Mikli Shal Gabi Karka Shmamino. So the Gemara comes to the conclusion that it should have mentioned another Kohen in the Mishnah of Lechem Aponim, and that's going to teach us that Kiddush Kli does not require that the Kohanim lift up the Kli. Omar Rav, Pshitoli Kometz Mikli Shal Gabi Karka. I come to the exact opposite conclusion. In my mind, it's obvious that the Kohanim have to lift up the Kli in order for the Kiddush process to take place. Shekei Matzinu B'siluk B'zichin, because that's the law that applies to when they remove the spoons of the Levona. And the Gemara spoke about before, as we saw on Amud Aleph, removing the spoons of the Levona. Shekein is makadshim mincha b'kli shal gabi karka. Shekein matzinu b'sidur b'zichin. So I stand corrected. Rava comes to the same conclusion that we had before, that in Kmitza you don't need the Kohanim to lift up the Kli, and the Rayaf is from Silik Bezichin, and therefore Rava comes to conclusion Mekadshim Mincha B'Kli Shal Gabi Karka Shekei Matzinu B'Sider Bezichin. Boy, Rava has a suffix. Kiddush Kometz Mai. So as we said before, there's a difference between the Kmitza and the Kiddush B'Kli. So in other words, until now, we've been discussing the Kmitza itself. And Rava came to the obvious conclusion, based on the analogy to Bazichin, that you can even do the Kmitza in a Kli that's on the Karka. But now, we want to know about the second stage in the process of a mincha, which is called Kiddush itself. Right? Should we learn it from the mincha itself? Because as we said in the first stage, Rava came to the conclusion that it's enough that it's sanctified in a vessel, even if the Kohen is not holding on to the vessel. Or should we learn it from Zvachim? In Zvachim, when it comes to Kabbalas Hadam, which is the second avodah of the 4 avodos, the halacha is that we need that the Kohanim hold on to the Kli, which is called the Mizrach, in which the Dam is received from the neck of the animal. So therefore, Rava vacillates as to whether or not in Mincha we should equate it with the first stage and say the Kiddush, like the first stage, could be done even in a Kli on the Karka, or do we say no, that we should derive it from Kabbalas Adam in Zvachim, and therefore we need that the Kohen hold on to the Kli. Hoda Pashte, after Rava raised this question, he came to a conclusion, Midam Yalfinan Le, we're going to derive it from Dam, and therefore the Kiddush, that when the Kometz is placed in stage number 2 into the vessel, requires that the Kohen hold on to the vessel. Is it possible that that's what Rava concluded? For Itma, we have a statement that Kovetz Shechaloko L'Shnei Kelim, Rav Nachman Omar Eno Kadosh. Rava Amar Kadosh. The halacha is that in Kabbalas Hadam, it's not acceptable, it's not valid if two Kohanim are holding on to the same Kli, and as a partnership they receive the Dam. And therefore, Rav Nachman says the same thing applies with regard to taking a kometz and dividing it up into two different kelim, such that the complete kometz is the sum total of that which is in both kelim. So Rav Nachman says that's unacceptable, because just like in Kabbalas Hadam, we don't accept it if there are two Kohanim that are holding on. Just 1 second. Leilif midam. I'm sorry. No, not the case I mentioned before. That's a different sugya about whether two Kohanim could do the Kabbalah together. No, we're talking about where the dam itself was received twice. In order to get the full amount of dam for the shir of Zrika, he was makabel part of that dam, half of the volume of the dam in one vessel. Then, as the blood is spurting out, he brought a second vessel to receive the other part of the dam. That's unacceptable. Says Rav Nachman, the same law applies with regard to a mincha, and therefore, cholko b'shnei kelim eino kadosh. And Rava says kadosh. So you see that Rava is not going to equate the laws of kmitza with the dam, and we just said that hadar pashte midam yalfinale. If midam yalfinale, then we should derive the same conclusion that if, in the case of the kometz was divided into two kelim, then it should be possible, like Rav Nachman. How could Rava say, no, it's valid? Hadave Rava me'ahi. Rava changed his mind in that psak that he gave, that if he accepts the kometz in two kelim, that it's kadosh, right? That was Rava said Omar Kadosh. No, Rava withdrew that statement and he accepted Rav Nachman and Eino Kadosh. And why Eino Kadosh? Because of the equation to dam, just like dam in Kabbalas Hadam cannot be in two different kelim, so too the kmitza cannot be divided up into two kelim. V'dam minol the lo mekadosh chatzon. How can you know that you need all the dam that's necessary for Zrika to be received in one vessel, not in two? To Tani Rav Tachlifa Ben Shol, a brisa, and here we're going to equate it with paraduma. Kidesh pachos mikdei azah bekli zeh, upachos mikdei azah bekli zeh lo kodesh. Right, in order to sanctify the mayim of the paraduma, then you have to put a certain amount of afer into the mayim, and now what he did was he put it in two different vessels, part of it in one vessel and part in another vessel. And this is based on the halacha of kiddush mechatos, when the afer, the paraduma, is mixed with mayim chayim, with spring water, in order to create a concoction and purify a tummy mess. So what did he do? he went ahead and he added and mixed the water of the Mayim Chaim together with the ashes of the Paraduma, and that's called Kiddush. And now what he did was there was pachas mikdei hazah, right? The hazah means you have to purify the tame by throwing the mixture onto his body, and there wasn't enough of kidei hazah in any single kli. And it says in the Brisa, lo kaddish, v'boilahu, and they had a suffix of bidam mai. How do we know that in the case of Kabbalas Hadam in Zvachim, like the case of Kiddush Mechatos, two vessels will not do. You need one single vessel. And the Gemara answered Hilchasahi. With regard to Paraduma, that's halacha l'moshishina. We don't derive any halachas from halacha l'moshishina. We don't make any equations, any analogies. Hilchasa lo yalfinon. Oh, Dilma, should we say Hasa, my time, and maybe it's not halacha l'moshmi Sinai, but the reason why the Kiddush has to take place in one single kli that has in it water kidei hazah is because of a pasuk. Dichsiv v'taval b'mayim is hachinami haksiv. With regard to dam, it says v'taval b'dam. So just like in Paradum it says v'taval, the word v'taval is b'mayim, and it means you have to have enough in the mayim in order for that tvila to sanctify the mayim. So too, with regard to dam, it says v'taval, and the word v'taval is going to teach me again. The pasuk is lokacha kohen Mashiach. This is the Kohen Mashiach shel par shel Kohen Gadol midam hapar veviosol ol moed v'taval hakohen etzba'o badam v'hizo min adam sheva pa'omim. And the Torah says hadam v'taval badam. And what does badam mean? That both batches of dam are the same. Just as in the second pasuk, the kli contains enough blam for all the sprinklings, all the azoyas, sheva azoyas. So too in the first stage, in the previous pasuk, the kohen has to receive in the vessel enough dam for sheva hazos. Omarava tanya nami hachi. I also derived from a brisa this conclusion: v'taval v'lo maspik. Right, he's got to dip his hands to the finger, but if there's dam that's left over on his finger, he shouldn't wipe it on the side of the kli and then use it for hazah. Badam she'ehei badam shir tefillah meikaro. That the amount of blood, the volume of blood from the get-go, has to be sufficient for all the sheva hazos. You can't have part of the dam in one vessel and another part of the dam in another vessel. Min adam shev be'inyan. V'yitzrich l'michtei v'toval, v'yitzrich l'michtei badam. So why is it that we need one derivation from paraduma? And no, just 1 second. I'm sorry. V'yitzrich l'michtav v'toval. And v'yitzrich l'michtav badam. Because v'toval teaches me that the dam that's on the let's say if he wiped his fingers on the side of the vessel, that's not dam that could be used for the hazos, for the sheva hazos. And badam tells me that the original amount of blood has to be a minimum volume that would be sufficient for all the tvilos and all the hazos. So why do we need both? If we only had the word v'toval, and we didn't have the extra word badam, I would have said afa gavdol kibel shir tvilos meikara, even though in the first kli he did not receive sufficient amount of dam for the azos. Is therefore kos rachmana badam. The Torah had to tell me badam that the entire amount was received in one vessel. Because Rahman Badam Hava Mina Filu Mistapik. It doesn't tell me that the dam that he wipes on the side of the kli cannot be used for the azos. Says Kosar one of it taval that only the dam that he dips his finger into the kli, that dam is valid for hazos. Now the brisa added on min hadam sheba inyan. Well, what does that mean? Min hadam sheba inyan, from the words hadam, right? In that pasuk, limute mai. Omar Rava lemute shirayim sheba etzba. So he has now remnants of blood on his finger, and the Kohen did one hazah, and he's now on his way to do the second hazah. He's got to clean his finger from any remnants of dam. Misayle Rabbi Loza the Omar shirayim sheba etzba psul. Right, any residue of dam on the fingers of the Kohen that are left there after the first hazah are invalid for the next hazah. That is the ruling of Rava based on Rabbi Lazar. Amalei Ravin barav adal Rava. I don't necessarily agree with you. I don't necessarily buy into this whole thing. Amri Talmidach Amar of Amram. Right, we heard from your Talmid in the name of Amram Tanya Brisa. Hoyamaz, if the Kohen was sprinkling the blood, and nitzah hazah miyado, the sprinkling. Oh, this has to do with kibbutz, right? There's a mitzvah of kibbutz if the dam gets onto a beged. So nitzah hazah miyado, right? Some dam splattered from his hand onto a beged. Im ad shelo hiza, if it's before he started the hazah ton kibbutz, then you require kibbutz. But mishahiza, after the hazah was implemented, ain ton kibbutz. There's no requirement of kibbutz. My lav, does this mean actual gomer hazah also mean he hasn't done all 7 sprinklings? Umisha gomer hazah, so if the splattering took place after he finished all 7 sprinklings, then there's no mitzvah of kibbutz. It would seem that any remnants between one hazah and the other on the fingers of the Kohen are fit for hazah, because the Brisa rules that the blood which splatters onto a garment before all hazahs, all shev hazahs have been implemented, is then it requires kibbutz. So you see that because the only dam that generates a chi of kibbutz is dam that's roy, that's fit and valid for hazah. So if it means that at what point do we no longer have the din of kibbutz is after he finishes all 7 sprinklings? That means any dam between one sprinkling and another would effectuate a chiyuv of kibbutz if it splatters on a garment. And that must mean that it's roy lahazah. Lo, the Gemara says that's not what the Bryce has in mind. Ad shelo yotza miyado hazah. Before the sprinkling, meaning if hasn't started any of sprinkling, is then ton kibbutz, right? Because the dam is royal hazah. Umishiyotza dam miyado. As soon as he does the first hazah, v'nitza, and then there's a splattering of that dam, mimasha nishar, which is on his hands, ein ton kibbutz. Why? Because it's not roy lizrika hazah. Esvei Abai challenged this from a brisa. No, he says it's a mishnah here. Gomar milahazos, when he finishes all 7 azos. Just 1 second. Where is this mishnah? That's very important for. Oh, this mishnah par. So we're going back to Paraduma. Paraduma also, like the partial Kohen Gadol, needs hazah keneged the Kodesh Kadoshim. Is Gomer milahazos when he finishes all the hazos mekanech yodo begufa shel para, right? He wipes his hands on the body of the cow that's being used for the paraduma. So we have to be medayik gomar in. It's only when he completes the entire process, and afterwards he wipes his hand, then he can put it on the gufa shel par, but lo gomer lo. If he still hasn't finished all the sprinklings of the blood of the paraduma towards the temple, as it says in the pasuk that the paraduma is slaughtered on Har HaZeisim, opposite the Migdash. The Kohen receives the blood in his left hand, dips his right forefinger into the blood in his left palm, sprinkles it towards the opening of the sanctuary. He makes a total of 7 sprinklings. And this is all based on the psukim in Sefer Bamidbar Perek Yutes. Anyway, we see clearly that the remnants of the blood on the Kohen's fingers are fit for sprinklings. Amalei. So Rava responds to Abaye, Gomar mekaneach yado. When he's finished all the azos, he wipes his hand on the body of the cow. But lo gomar mekaneach etzbo. We have to read it in a way that it says that if he hasn't yet completed all the sprinklings, then he's got to clean off his finger. Each of the first 6 sprinklings, after each of them, he wipes the blood off his finger because it's not royal hazah. So Gemara says, Bishleim Gomar Mekaneach Yoda Begufa Shel Para. I understand that after he finishes all the sprinklings, he wipes his hand on the body of the cow. Dichsiv V'sarafas HaPara Be'einav. So after the Kohen finishes the sprinklings, he descends the mountain, meaning Har HaZeisim, to the place where the cow is burned. Of course, it has to be Lifnei Einov. It has to be burnt in front of his eyes. And therefore, it's a simple matter that at that point, he wipes his hand on the body of the cow. But how do we understand this din, that when he is not yet finished, he wipes his finger, on what is he going to wipe it? And the Gemara answers, he wipes the finger on the rim of the bowl, Okay, now the Gemara is going to, for tomorrow, the Gemara is going to go back to Rabbi Lazar in terms of Chavite Kohen Gadol. Amir Hashem will pick that up tomorrow. Also, I think at noon, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, wishing you a great day.